So what we've got here is a bit of a mystery machine bought super cheap on eBay as a non-working computer, and it looked like it might have some interesting stuff in from the photographs that the seller was showing. So I bought it for £15, and now we're going to crack it open and take a look. Hello and welcome. I've had this thing for a good few months. I saw it on eBay. It was going for a starting bid of £15 as a non-working machine, and I thought it would be worth it just for the drives, to be honest. But there was some photographs of the interior, and there was an interesting looking graphics card in there. The advert also said that it was a socket A machine, so it's an Athlon, a first gen Athlon of some description probably. And back in the day, I jumped from a Pentium 2 to my first ever complete build, which I bought, which was an Athlon 850, a Thunderbird, I think. And that was the first machine that I ever overclocked, and that took me past the 1 gigahertz barrier for the first time. So I did kind of want to make a machine like that at some point. And the case that I had back then was also one of these lurid coloured cases that were quite popular at the time. This one's a bit battered, but worst case, I thought I could get some parts out of this and maybe use the case to make a test frame or something like that. So we'll open it up and see what's inside. So on the front, we've got just the standard CD-ROM optical drive embedded in this horrible silver frame. What possessed them to make silver faceplates? I know there were a few silver PCs, but peripherals in silver weren't exactly falling off the shelves back then. And we've got the standard 1.44 megabyte floppy disk. Looks a bit filthy. A nasty bezel around the reset and start button with the silver paint flaking off. And a start button that goes in and refuses to come out again, so not great. And down the bottom here, behind a funky little trapdoor, we've got our headphones, microphone, and a couple of USB ports. Flip the machine round, and on the back, down the bottom, we've got a modem, which probably won't be using that. Then there's this graphics card that I'm curious about, so we'll crack her open and take a look at that in a second. And it looks like they've got the onboard audio wired through to the PC speaker. Not much going on the I/O panel. We've got 3 mini jacks for the onboard sound chip. This thing looks like it might have come with a network card, but it's not present on this particular motherboard. 4 USB ports, 1 parallel port, 1 serial port, and PS2 connectors for mouse and keyboard. And the cherry on the cake, a nicely rusting power supply at the top there. Horrible gold colour. Yeah, it's a pretty shitty looking PC. Anyway, that's all the obligatory boring crap out the way on the outside, so let's crack it open and see what goodies we've got inside. Holy caked-in, baked-in crap. Look at that, that's filthy. So even the cables are absolutely filthy. That's quite something. I don't know where this thing spent its life, but big clean coming up, and then we'll see what we've got. Think we need some paper kitchen towels on my desk to catch all of this shit, because I don't want it being ingrained into my work area. And first card out is just the crappy Connexent modem that I probably won't be putting back in. So yeah, awesome. This is a WinFast Geforce 2 Titanium, aka Geforce 2 Ti. It is a fairly rare card, I think. I did actually think it was this card when I saw the photos on eBay, but I didn't like to ask the seller just in case he decided he wanted more money or whatever, or took the card out and replaced it with some other rubbish. But yeah, really pleased to have this. The Geforce 2 Ti wasn't actually part of the original Geforce 2 range, I don't think. It came out at the same time as the Geforce 3 launched, and it was actually aimed at the mid-range for people who maybe couldn't afford to get into the Geforce 3s on release, but to give them something to sort of keep them at the top end of the previous generation. So awesome. And I think this one is also a 64 megabyte version, and it should be a pretty damn good card. So the cards are out. I guess all that remains now is to get all of the other bits and pieces out onto that kitchen towel and start to scrape some of that cack off them. So get this box stripped and get to work. I'll just continue to get all of the other bits and pieces out of this case, get the CD-ROM drive out, get the horrible gold rusty PSU out, and then it's just going to be the motherboard, get that out, and then we'll just be left with this empty, crappy case that, with its flaking paint and sticking buttons, and nah, it's just a nasty case. I'm not going to use it for anything. Oh, that's a shame. I'm sure it was the height of fashion in its day, but it's got to go. And wow, look at this motherboard. I guess it was about this time that the first windowed cases started to show their faces, so motherboards started to look equally flash as well. And this particular model comes to us from Elite Group, and the model number is K7S5A Pro. It's a socket 462 motherboard, also known as socket A, so it takes Durons, Athlons and Athlon XP processors. There's an SIS chipset on there, two different kinds of memory slots. There's a 284-pin DDR DIMM sockets and 268-pin SD-RAM DIMM sockets. Maximum memory is 1 GB. Then there's one AGP x4 slot, 5 PCI slots and 1 AMR slot. And AMR is not something I've ever really messed around with. If I could find a card, I'd like to have a bit of a play with it. But I think that was Intel's proprietary shot at capturing a market for software-driven sound cards and modem cards. But as things turned out, modems remained on the PCI bus and sound tended to get integrated into the motherboard. So as far as I ever saw, these things weren't used very much at all. There is built-in sound on this motherboard from C Media, though I've chosen to put in a discrete sound card, also coincidentally from C Media, but I think back in those days the onboard sound didn't have a great rep, so I was to sort of stick with discrete cards, and that's what I've chosen to do for this build. Break out the IPA and give this thing a little clean and see what we've got. It's just like Christmas. And there we go. Hopefully you can see that. It's AMD Duron 1300. So, never had a Duron before. These things were supposed to be highly overclockable. I would have preferred an Athlon Thunderbird, just because that was kind of what I had back in the day and what I really want. So I think ultimately I'll probably replace this Duron here with a Thunderbird at some point, but in the meantime, it'd be interesting to see if we can get this thing overclocked. And now for the bit that I've been putting off for as long as possible, time to clean this dirty, dirty motherboard. And as I was doing this, I could feel it going into my throat and up my nose and stuff. I kind of wish I'd worn one of those gas masks. It's not like I don't have enough masks kicking around after what's been going on for the last few years, but I kind of wish I'd put one on while I was doing this. There was dust flying everywhere. But when all that was done, it came out looking pretty good. All the capacitors look good. It looks pretty clean and nothing to worry about. Nice and shiny. Excellent. So there was a reasonable looking Cooler Master CPU cooler on here, so I'll give that a good clean as well because there's tons of crap wedged between the fins on the heatsink here. Clean off the thermal paste so we can get some new stuff on there and get that all put back together again. Cool. Pardon the pun. The IDE and the floppy disk drive cables in here were equally covered in shit, so I really don't know how it got so much dust, but I don't think I've ever actually had to clean disk cables before, so I guess it's the first time for everything. But we need to give these a damn good wipe as well because they are filthy. Yeah, once they were done, there's still a bunch of things that needed cleaning, still all covered in this crap. So the cards where they were lying horizontal all had crap on the top part where that was facing up in the case. All the drives equally on the top surface where the dust had settled. So it really does seem like this thing was put in a very dusty attic or something, and it's just where it's been standing upright, there's just been dust settling. But how so much dust got inside of the case, I do not know. But anyway, we'll get all these other bits and pieces cleaned, and then we can start thinking about putting it all back together. Now that all the bits are clean, it's the question of what to put them in. So I don't want to put them in that other rubbishy case. So I went off looking for one of my beige boxes that I have a few of kicking around, and came across this. I'd totally forgotten I even had this, and this is perfect. So it's another blue bling case from about that period, so we can keep that look and feel, but this one's in much, much better condition. This case is pretty clean. It's got a few scratches on the top, but it just needs the briefest of wipes, and it looks pretty smart, so I think it's going to be a great fit for this build. And another bonus, when I opened it up, there's a power supply inside, where I should have seen it from the back, but I didn't, so I don't have to use that horrible gold rusty thing or replace it with one of my other ones that I would probably prefer to keep for other builds. So we've got this Colours IT 400 watt, not the best make in the world, but it'll do for now. This case had a black DVD writer in it, and that was no good. I need it to be beige or roughly match this, so I put the one from the old case in, and that was a kind of grey colour and didn't quite match either. I had a rummage around in my other optical drives and came up with this DVD burner. I think it's the best match. It's not quite right, but it looks okay. I guess these crazy blue cases were a response to this. The iMac G3 came out about 3 years earlier, and was such a big thing, and everybody was using beige PC boxes, so there was suddenly this move to try and emulate that kind of look and feel, but I don't think it really stuck around. So we had these coloured PCs for a while, and even their OEMs started using them like this compact advert shows, but then we went back to black boxes for our PCs, so the colour didn't last long. So everything's clean, we've got a nice new case. Now for the fun bit, and that's just to put it all back together. So to begin with, we get the front panel connectors hooked up to the motherboard, get the motherboard back inside, get the cards back in place. So for this, I'm going to replace the modem with the networking card, since this motherboard doesn't support networking. Going to get the hard drive fitted. This case had one missing foot, and one of the other plastic feet was held on by a screw and some kind of plug. So I'm going to take all of those off and replace them with some of these rubber non-slip furniture things that you put underneath your chairs to stop them slipping on wooden floors, I guess. They'd be perfect for this. Last bits and pieces are in. Hook up all of the connectors and let's boot her up and see if there's any sign of life. And there is. Yoo-hoo! So it boots. Got the usual CMOS settings wrong, CMOS memory size wrong, so I guess it needs a new coin cell, so I'll stick a new one of those in. I probably should have tested this first, but I kind of assumed that that sticking power button was probably going to be the issue with this, so yeah, I'm pleased it works. Oops, almost forgot my sound card, so I need to get that in there, and this is just another C-Media sound card, so same basically as the chip that's on the motherboard, but I just kind of like having a discrete sound card in these old builds. C-Media cards have a pretty good sound for sort of general day-to-day use in gaming. They don't support all of the fancy bells and whistles like EAX and surround sound formats and stuff like that, but this will do me fine, I think. Okay, coin cells replaced. Into the BIOS, set the date and time, and that has rid of those errors on boot up now. So the next issue I hit was I put a hard drive in this machine, and it was a hard drive from another machine that had a clean install of Windows XP on it, but it would not boot. It kept on just hanging on where it says the previous shutdown was invalid and do you want to boot normally or go into safe mode or whatever. It just froze at that point. So what I'm going to do is quickly swap it out for another hard drive, because I don't want to lose that clean install of Windows XP, and if this machine doesn't like it for some reason, I can put it back where it came from and we're going to use this Western Digital Protege, 80GB, and this one's clean, so I'll have to install something on it. And I'm kind of thinking maybe Windows 98 for this build. I know that when I had my Athlon Thunderbird, it was right on the cusp. When I got it and built it, I was Windows 98, and then at some point, while I still owned it, XP came along. But I'm going to go with 98 to begin with. And now we install Windows 98. It's kind of a zen moment where you sit and your mind drifts. I do remember back in the day I used to think that this thing used to take forever. You know, installing Windows 98, I think it took about 20 minutes. I installed Microsoft Flight Simulator on my Windows 10 gaming machine a few weeks ago, and let me tell you, that was tedious. I think that took about 8 hours or something ridiculous on a broadband download, just updating crap. The good old days. So drivers time, and we've got sound card drivers, graphics card drivers, motherboard drivers, and USB drivers to load. We'll start with the sound drivers, and this proved to be quite tricky. It just wouldn't load off the installers, and it took quite a few attempts just going through control panel and reloading the driver that way, but eventually it did work. So processor-wise and sound card-wise, this is very much a machine from the year 2001. So going to do a bit of benchmarking now on 3D Mark 2001, and then I'm going to go and have a look and see if I can overclock the CPU and see if that makes any difference. So let's see how this goes. 3701 3D Marks. Okay, let's see if we can do anything to make it faster. Well, it's a bit disappointing because it looks like in this BIOS you can't actually change anything. The only thing you can change is the CPU speed for predefined steps, of which there aren't very many. So I could step this up to the next level, which I think is something like 1.75 gigahertz or something like that, but I can't mess about with the voltage, I can't see the front side bus speed, and I can't adjust anything else apart from the CPU speed. So I looked up this motherboard, and apparently no, you can't really overclock with it. There was a BIOS kicking around somewhere back in the day, though I would have no hope of finding it now, that did allow you to do some tweaking in here, so I think I'm going to have to shelve the idea of overclocking this and seeing if I could speed it up. Not that I plan to overclock a bit of vintage hardware in any major way. I just want to tweak it a little bit just for fun, and then put it back to the way it was, because these things are old and I don't want to burn them out any faster than needs be. But I think I'll have to shelve the overclocking idea for now, but it might be a project for the future. So when it's all sitting there together, I'm really happy with this build. This build is going to be one that I'm going to keep, and I wasn't expecting that at the end of this little messing about session with that old piece of crap that I bought on eBay for cheap. So it's a great little Windows 98 machine. It reminds me a lot of the one that I had back in the day. I would need to get that Duron replaced with an Athlon to be more authentic and to give me a bit more power, and I'm really pleased with the graphics card that I got for what I paid for the machine. So in time-honoured tradition, like breaking a bottle on the bow of a launching ship, I need to put a sticker on this, and I just happen to have an Athlon sticker case badge, which I was going to use for another project, for another thing, but I'll have to buy something else for that, and that will be featured in a later video. So let's get this thing on there to make this build complete. It's a shame that I can't do the overclocking that I was planning to do, but never mind, I'll stick a game on here now. And I had a look on my shelves for ones that I was playing back in those times when I had my Athlon Thunderbird, and Dungeon Siege was a big one. Ultima Online was another big one, albeit that was towards the end of Ultima Online when the 3D version was out, and I was also transitioning over to Star Wars Galaxies at that time. And the other big game I remember playing on that machine was probably Dune, Emperor Battle for Dune, I think it was called. That was the last of that kind of strategy series based around the Dune saga.
A long time ago, on the continent of Orana, the once magnificent empire of stars had crashed.
So there we have it, Dungeon Siege, an absolute classic. I can still remember quite vividly sitting in front of my Athlon Thunderbird in the early 2000s trying to beat that boss level. It's a shame I didn't get around to doing a bit of gentle overclocking on this machine, but I've already ordered on eBay an Athlon 1.3, the full Athlon Thunderbird 1.3, which is kind of the equivalent of this Duron 1.3. At some point I'll try and source a motherboard that has better overclocking functionality, and I think I'll probably do another video on this machine where I replace the motherboard and do a bit of overclocking on the Duron, do a bit of overclocking on the Athlon, and see how they compare. When I built my Athlon Thunderbird, a friend of mine built a Duron, but we never really compared them. There is some shenanigans you have to do on the chip itself where you have to bridge some connectors. I did it with a pencil back then. I remember getting a sheet of hand-typed instructions from a website called overclockers.co.uk, who are now quite a big retailer, but back then they were quite a niche, strictly overclocking thing, hence the name. But it'll be interesting to see a little bit of overclocking. The only difference between the two chips is essentially the level 2 cache. There's 256k on the Thunderbird and there's 64k on the Duron, so it'd be great to see just how much they differ and how far you can push them, albeit gently with them being so old. Well, that's pretty much it for this build video. It turned out to be quite fun. I wasn't expecting it, and I've got quite a nice little machine at the end of it. I hope you enjoyed going through this process with me, and if you did and enjoyed watching this video, I hope you'd consider giving me a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to the channel or leaving a comment below to let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.